So I'm David Shackelford. I work on the product team at PagerDuty, and I'm super excited to be able to talk to you guys about empathy. And I really like the point that I think Matt made yesterday, is we spend too much time talking about the importance of empathy and too little time talking about how to do it. So I will give you one slide on the why, and then the rest will be the how. So empathy is not just awesome for like humanitarian, ethical, hug it out reasons. It is a competitive advantage. It helps us build better products because we understand our users and how to solve their problems. It helps us work with our teams better and more efficiently. And I think it actually helps us build a more resilient culture that's more scalable as we get bigger and more diverse. So I thought that I was awesome at empathy. I've worked in a bunch of customer-facing roles my whole life. This is me teaching public school in San Francisco. I've done customer service. I've done tech support. I've succeeded in a bunch of roles where you'd think that you need to be really empathetic in order to succeed in them. And I was. I've had an easy time sort of seeing things from other people's perspective. And then last spring, my girlfriend and I were having relationship trouble. We just couldn't come to an agreement. We were kind of talking past each other. This long relationship really felt in jeopardy. And I called a mutual friend, trying to get some relationship advice. Like, I'm sort of at the end of my rope. I don't know how to deal with this. And she told me that I needed to work on my empathy skills. And that was sort of hard to hear, because it had always been something that came naturally to me. I had never actually had to think about what empathy was, or how to do it. And so I had to completely shift my thinking from this fixed mindset where something's just an ability you have and you're either good at it or you're bad, to more of a growth mindset where you actually strive to get better at something and continually improve. And I want to share with you guys today just some of the stuff that's been helpful to me, and hopefully it will be helpful to you guys as well. So let's do this. Definitions are good. I like definitions. Empathy is seeing things from another person's perspective. I think Catherine Daniels in Minneapolis said you have to have cat pictures in these things, so here's the cat on the deck. Walking a mile in somebody else's shoes, understanding where somebody's coming from. These are all empathy. And some things make empathy harder, some things make it easier. Empathy by itself is sort of a hard skill to start with because we spend a lot of time in our lives practicing being ourselves. It's a very natural thing. You're born, and then you're you, and for the rest of your life, everything you see is through your eyes. So it's not a natural thing to step out of that. But some things make it easier, some things make it harder. Shared experience makes things a lot easier. If somebody comes and complains to me that the syntax on 2 of PagerDuty's API endpoints is frustrating and they need conditionals in their code, and I was working on those same endpoints the other hack day, and we're both like cis white hetero males in the tech industry, that's sort of playing empathy on easy mode, right? It's very easy to understand where that person's coming from. On the other hand, if somebody is coming to me for empathy and they're relating the pain of childbirth, I have not birthed a child, I will most likely not birth a child, that's more difficult.
Not with that attitude.
Length and depth of relationship. If I know you really well, if I know the other things going on in your life, I can more easily explain what you're doing, what you're saying, in the context of those constraints, goals, struggles, feels. And finally, if we have shared goals. If I know that we're working towards the same thing, you do something, I don't understand it, but I see how it might be in service of the shared goal, it's easier for me to figure out where you might be coming from. What hurts empathy? Conflict. If we're at odds about something. If you're under stress, if you feel oppressed, threatened, in danger of some sort, it's very hard to give empathy. And if you feel like somebody has just a very differing value system than you, it's difficult to empathize. So, Knafton framework. Raise your hands if you're familiar with this. Cool, a couple hands in the room. I don't have time to do a complete treatment of this. I highly encourage you to go Google it. It's spelled different than it's pronounced, but it basically has domains of complexity. And it's helpful for understanding how to respond to particular situations. So the obvious domain is stuff where cause and effect are very deterministically linked. We can easily model them. You can almost automate them. Something like a bicycle. It's pretty easy to reason about what a bicycle is going to do given some inputs. Here we're basically just, as inputs come in, putting them in little boxes and taking action based on them. Complicated, we have to do some analysis. And the link might have many nodes, but cause and effect are still pretty linked together. Like a 747 has a lot of moving parts, but it mostly responds the same to the same sorts of inputs. Flight safety has a pretty good record. Then we start getting into the complex domains, something like a frog, where it doesn't actually behave the same each time when you give it the same input. You can't really reason about cause and effect ahead of time. I promise this will be related to empathy. Here we basically have to kind of probe the system a little bit, see how it reacts, and then try to infer what the complex relationship between cause and effect might have been. Then you get to chaotic, where stuff just breaks down. There's no real visible link between cause and effect at all. So, relationship to empathy. I think you can look at empathy in domains as well. Obvious domain is this place where we don't even think about empathy because it's almost automatic or irrelevant. Something like the supermarket checkout. You're checking out, you're handing money to the cashier, they're giving you groceries. You don't really need empathy there. That said, please empathize with your cashier. Don't walk out of here saying that David said that we should have no empathy for cashiers. But the success of that interaction doesn't hinge on whether or not you're able to empathize well. It starts to get complicated when you might need to express some needs. You might need people to understand where you're coming from, but you know the people pretty well. Stakes are low. And what you're asking for is probably pretty easy to give. So something like your daily stand-up or like a team planning meeting, can somebody give me some code review? Can somebody take my on-call shift? I'm going to be on PTO this day, I need this meeting handled. Stuff where there's not really a question of values or alignments, you're basically just like sorting through constraints. And if you're asking for code review, it's very easy for everybody on your team to understand that because they've all needed code review in the past. This is a place where we have to empathize, but most people have a very easy time of it. The place it gets harder is when you have differing values and needs and constraints that come into an interaction. Cross-team prioritization meetings are a pretty good example because the very fact that you're having a prioritization meeting means that not everybody in that meeting is going to get exactly what they want, when they want it, in the way they want it, otherwise you wouldn't need to prioritize, right? And so this is the place that empathy most often breaks down, and the place where we need to focus and actually work at it strategically in order to maintain empathy and succeed there. And then you've sort of got the chaotic domain, heated arguments, violence, cause and effect, what you say and what the person hears are just not related whatsoever. And that's a pretty hard place to be. And basically there you need to remove yourself or that person from the situation until you can come back in a way where even if the relationship's really complex, there is still some relationship between cause and effect. So I think when empathy breaks down, it's most often a breakdown in communication. And slight segue, this is an OSI network diagram. Basically shows how information from a sender's computer to a receiver's computer, server to client, has to go through a bunch of levels of translation on the server side, over a link somewhere, and then on the receiver, a bunch of different levels of translation until it becomes something meaningful, something actionable. And there's a bunch of different models of communication, but one way that you can model it is in a similar way where, I wish we were telepaths, but we're not. We never share meaning directly. I have something that I want to share. I wrap it up in a bunch of different layers of encoding, language, the channel I use. I put some message into the world. I say something, I log a Jira ticket, I send an email, and then you experience that, and you send that through a bunch of different layers of decoding. These are things like what you think that the words I use mean. People sometimes have different ideas of the meanings of different words. I'm probably making references to shared things that we both know about. We might have different understandings. Our relationship, do you think that I'm a kind person? Do you think I'm sarcastic? These things are going to color the way you see and experience anything that I do and anything that I say. And the funny thing is this is going to change from day to day, from person to person. Stuff like your current mood, did you get enough sleep last night, is going to change the way that you perceive anything that anybody else does. So it's a very non-deterministic thing. This is a very complex system. And so when I think about the stuff in that message, I think about explicit meaning and implicit meaning, where explicit meaning is that stuff that anybody with zero context could understand about that message. I went to the store to get milk yesterday. I mean, unless like the store and milk are metaphors, most people are going to get what I'm talking about there. Whereas something like knock knock.
Who's there?
Java. So that was a failure of implicit meaning there. So the joke is that Java takes a long time to answer that one. But went differently as planned. Sometimes you're in people's Slack rooms, a different team's Slack room, and you'll go in there and there's just this gibberish. Somebody's talking about, like, do not slow roll the unicorn pool during deploys to int environments. And as an outsider, that just makes zero sense whatsoever. But because the team knows each other really well, they've gotten very good at predicting how each other are going to decode a lot of implied meaning. When you spend a lot of time with somebody, you get very good at decoding the way they're going to understand anything you do. So you start communicating more in jokes, in references to stuff. And that's fine. It sort of feels nice to be included, part of the group. There's nothing wrong with communicating with a lot of implied meaning. But the failure case of this, the place this goes wrong, is when I think you're going to interpret something one way, and instead you interpret it a different way. I put some message into the world. I mean something in earnest. You think that I meant it sarcastically. And now we've got an empathy gap. And we go off and we do stuff based on this. We form opinions of people based on this. And if we don't close that gap, I'm going to have a bad time. So a skill we can use to close this gap between implicit meaning and explicit meaning is active listening. And active listening is bigger than just putting away your phone and making eye contact and being present and all that stuff. I mean, that's very good too. That's sort of a base level. But active listening is listening with the intent of really understanding. Listening to win. So the very fact that we couldn't accurately decode the first time means if we just guess again, we're probably not going to get it the second time. And we have a toolkit that we use when we can't get something the first time, and it's this iterative thing, this lean thing of build, measure, learn. So if we're building software, we've got a hypothesis about something that'll solve a market problem, and we build a prototype to test that hypothesis. Then we put it out in the world, and we see how it does, and we use that learning to inform a better hypothesis the next time. And so when I'm trying to empathize with somebody, and I didn't get it right the first time, I know that there's an empathy gap, I'm thinking of it in a similar way. Except instead of a prototype, what I'm offering up is a prototype of my understanding. I'm paraphrasing what I think their experience of this situation or the world is. And then I'm confirming it with them and using that to build a better hypothesis. And the cool thing about this is when you're doing build, measure, learn loops with software, it often takes like dozens or hundreds or thousands of times to get it right. Whereas people really like to be understood. It feels really good to be understood. People want to be empathized with. So at the point you start on this, they're going to help you along the cycle, and it's not going to take very long until you get to a place where you understand them really well. So paraphrasing is pretty simple. It's basically stating as verbosely as possible, as explicitly as possible, where you think this person might be coming from. It's good to be speculative, not conclusive. You don't want to say, you feel like this. You want to say, hey, I observed these things. This is how I think you might be feeling. Did I get it right? Am I missing something here? Am I thinking about a point thing, but it's really a pattern of behavior? But making it clear to them that you want to understand, and you're guessing in service of really wanting to figure out where they're coming from. Different things you can be asking about here are the facts, like what specifically triggered this upset, this breach in empathy? What made you feel bad? How they're feeling. There's a difference between anger and frustration and fear and sadness. People can breach empathy in different ways. Context, what else is going on in their lives that might have combined with what you did or what somebody else did to produce these feelings. And finally, needs. Any follow-on requests they have. So I want to use an example. Names changed to protect the innocent. One of the guys on another product team came to me and he said, stop piling work on my team. And I'm like, crap, well, clearly I didn't empathize with this guy well enough. We have a problem here. And this seems like a pretty big problem. I'm like, we work together a lot. Piling work on seems like sort of a core, maybe it's an issue with me, the way I work. We go to meetings a lot, we send emails, like, what did I do wrong here? So a lot of times we react to this in a few different modes. The first mode that we react to it in is defensive. So maybe a light I'm sorry, but mostly explaining why you did the thing you did. making excuses. And that's a natural thing to do because we're feeling attacked. And when you feel attacked, you want to defend yourself. The other place that we often go is apologetic, like, I'm sorry, I'll stop. That's another reaction. And that one, while probably better than defensiveness, also tends not to fix the empathy gap. Because to start with, when I say I'm sorry, I'll stop, I don't actually know what to stop. I'm like racking my brain for all the different, probably dozens of times in that week that we've interacted, and then our entire working relationship. And if I say I'll stop, I have no idea even where to start stopping. But the other piece is I'm sorry doesn't communicate to this person that I actually care about their problem or understand it. Even though I might mean, internally, I care about your problem a lot, and I'm really sorry that I hurt you, they might hear, like, I'm sorry as sort of a throwaway, get off my back, stop bugging me thing. Again, we're in this realm of implicit meaning. Something like I'm sorry is really easy to decode several different ways. So I want to start on the active listening stuff. Something like, it sounds like you're really upset. Can we take some time to talk about this? It is important to me to solve this. And I'm going to start digging into these facts, fields, and contexts. So this guy, we'll call him Matt, turns out that after I asked him what the catalyzing event here was, there was a Friday afternoon where I logged like a string of 6 Jira tickets against his team. And I didn't put a due date on them. I didn't assign them to anybody. And he ended up seeing them in Slack. So one of the cool things about this process is at the point that I've gotten Matt to say, hey, this piling work on my team thing, it's really about these 6 Jira tickets you logged on Friday. Like, we're not done solving this. But the instant I was able to get him to say it's about this and not other stuff, like, the sky is falling thing tension evaporated. Like, piling work on my team seems like a really big problem. This is 6 Jira tickets. We're paid professionals. We can probably deal with it no matter how bad these 6 Jira tickets are. This has become a tractable problem. So already there's sort of like some empathy building and some tension evaporating. So next, I'm wondering about his feelings and why these were a problem. Because now I'm thinking about the Jira tickets and like all the ways that I might have messed that up. Is it because he thought they belonged in a different team? Were my descriptions of these tickets like too sparse, not enough context? The piling work was just about like them being meaningless or not enough context there? What was the deal? So I was able to talk to him and understand that, first of all, he thought that the Jira tickets being logged were a request for them to be done immediately. And he has a lot of other work on his plate, plus this was a Friday afternoon, so he's really scared of getting them all done. The tickets were fine, they belonged to the team, like, it's good work to be done, but he was just scared of not getting them all done on time. And then frustrated with me for not checking in on that before assigning work. So here we're getting at some places where there was implied meaning translated differently. There's some teams where we've got an understanding where I'll log a ticket and there's no expectation of work until there's either a due date or an assignee or an in-person meeting. And as long as we both understand that, it works out fine. But if I expect this person to decode my stuff that way, and he has a different understanding of what those tickets mean, then we've got this gap. And until we're actually able to surface that, to surface like what our expectations were, we're unable to really get past there. And at this point, once I think I have a pretty good understanding, I try to wrap it up and try to make sure that this person understands where I think they're coming from and see if I'm right. Something like, sounds like it was really frustrating to have this large amount of work come out of nowhere, and you were scared that you wouldn't get it done in time. Is that right there? Did I miss anything? No, I didn't include anything in there about the different expectations we might have had or any excuses on my side, anything in the way of explanation. The very first step is getting them to understand that you understand their feelings and why it's important to them. And at this point, stuff is just like rainbows. Like 90% of the tension there, and I found this in situation after situation, tense customer calls, tense meetings, at the point you come to somebody that has a problem, and you're able to state to them in words that they can confirm that like, this is what happened, and this is why you feel the way you feel. Yeah, we're going to do some like follow-up tasks, but everything else is smooth sailing once you sort of get that confirmation of, I understand you understanding me. And when it came to remediation actions, none of us really had a strong preference among a bunch of good options. Like that norm around no work required until an assignee is assigned. That's a cool way to solve it. Let's have a meeting before logging JIRA tickets. That's fine. It didn't really matter which way we solved it. What mattered was turning this corner of understanding what the problem actually was. So when you're doing follow-on actions, one thing that you want to keep in mind is if you want somebody to solve your problem, you want them to be successful at it. And you'll never know, and they'll never know if they're successful at it, unless it's something that you can actually measure and test. So again, don't have time to go into everything around SMART goals, but basically making requests as specific and actionable and positive as possible is really helpful. There's also another magical thing about this getting to that place where you understand their problem, is that at the point you say a no, I don't have bandwidth, I can't handle this, there's so much more ready to receive that no. If we get to the point where I say to this person, you know, here's where I think you are, they're like, yeah, you really understand my problem. If I say, look, I don't have bandwidth right now to actually address this, that's a totally different sounding no than if the no comes at the beginning. Because the no that comes at the beginning is really ambiguous. It's unclear whether it's no, I care and I can't, or no, I don't care. But after you've made it really explicit that you do care, when you're unable to fulfill a request, it's much easier to do that. One of the things that comes up with this is you want to avoid this thing called the fundamental attribution error, which is this human tendency to take a problem that happens and assign blame for it to one thing. So in this case, it's really easy to say, like, well, I logged the JIRA tickets, this is my fault. And I'll be accountable for logging those JIRA tickets. I will say, yes, I logged those JIRA tickets, and I'll also be responsible for, I want to fix this empathy gap. I want to figure out how to make things better. But there's a difference between that and trying to put all the blame for the situation on me and those JIRA tickets, because that means that we're basically just solving that problem for these two people in that one situation in that one way. So again, this is in the complex domain. There's a complicated and not super deterministic relationship between the stuff that happens and the stuff that comes out of it. So if I'm thinking about this in my mind, what I actually end up with is sort of this timeline of the things that happened and the reactions that happened to it, and maybe some positive follow-up actions. And this is starting to look a little bit like a Blameless postmortem of some sort. I'll have some links at the end of this talk to some good reading on Blameless postmortem culture. But you start to apply a lot of the same practices of separating the what from the how people reacted and approaching things in a very sort of positive, forward-looking way. So I don't know what we call it, blameless stuff, but go read the Etsy post on that. So you can work on how to solve empathy breakdowns, especially interpersonally, for a while. But I'm a fan of people being successful at what they do, and so I want to offer some things that I've seen helpful in scaling empathy up through an organization, in setting people up to succeed at this sort of vulnerable, tricky stuff. So the first thing is common language. The things we are talking about here, the things we're talking about that we were talking about yesterday, they're like fuzzy concepts. They're concepts with a lot of implied meaning. They're concepts where there's not even really a single dictionary definition, because people are sort of taking what the dictionary says and kind of rolling with it and establishing whole philosophies and ways of working based on it. So these are fuzzy concepts. And I'm going to argue for a convention over configuration thing here. There's a bunch of communication frameworks out here. There's lots of stuff like DISC, which was the personality categorization that Matt shared yesterday. There's things like Myers-Briggs, the color code. I really like nonviolent communication. This is actually fun. This is a memoir of the guy that basically changed the way the FBI does hostage negotiation from a really confrontational, sort of adversarial thing to something that's very empathy-driven and based on understanding and empathizing with the needs of the hostage taker. So it's like this cool kind of cop thrill ride, but there's this sort of subversive empathy message in the middle. So if your execs and folks aren't on board with getting all hippie woo-woo, then saying it might be fun to like read Stalling for Time might be a fun way in. But getting everybody who's trying to work on this stuff to just try one of these things. It can also be watching a talk, reading a blog post, whatever, but try one thing and all read it together and talk about it later. Can make it easier to sort of refer back to places where fuzzy words need more definition. So the next thing is inclusivity. So you remember how one of the things that hurts empathy is stress, is feeling attacked? Well, a thing that makes you feel sort of stressful or attacked can be feeling like you have a base need that's not really handled. If you feel like the way an organization works, the way a team works together, the way things are structured, doesn't respect you, doesn't respect your needs, doesn't give you what you need to be happy and successful, that can make it very hard to offer empathy outwards. So this is a completely non-exhaustive list. There's no gold lead certification for inclusivity. You don't like get a gold star and like, okay, we're done, did inclusivity, like moving on. No, this is something that you work out. This is something that all organizations can get better and better at. But just thinking through all the different ways and different needs people might have in your org and ways to make sure that they feel accepted and included. Things like people might need to pick up kids at 6 p.m. Maybe that's not a good time for an all hands. Some people don't drink. I would feel super excluded if I went to a company and there was no men's bathroom. So I would imagine that I might also feel excluded if I was sort of outside the gender binary and there was no bathroom for me. I mean, these are things where you don't have to change them all tomorrow, but keeping them in mind and sort of working on constant improvement here, I think really helps set you up to be more empathetic and sort of blocks empathy for people that aren't feeling included. So if you are like on your phone or laptop, give me like 2 minutes of undivided attention, because this is the actual important part that I want to get across, which is it's extremely, extremely hard for somebody to empathize if they don't feel empathized with. It is sort of prisoner dilemma-y. It basically means that if you don't care about my problems, it's very hard for me to care about yours. Kind of turns organizations into these bistable systems, where if everybody's really empathetic, it's easy for everybody else to be empathetic towards everybody else. But if nobody is, it's really hard to make that initial jump. And that's what we have to do. We have to make this jump. So I've got sort of a challenge that I want you guys to walk away from this with, which is at some point in the future, somebody is going to come to you with a problem they have. They're going to be looking for empathy. And there's going to be a bunch of stuff that you need from them. And there's going to be a bunch of stuff that you don't need from them, but it's problems in your life and you'd like some empathy of your own. Like this person's coming to you with a problem, and you are not in the mood to empathize because you've got a bunch of baggage of your own. And I'm going to ask you to do this like just once. Take all your baggage, take everything you might possibly want from this person, even if they're like a very hard to deal with person, like put it all aside, and try to just sit down, put away your phone and stuff, and understand their problem, and paraphrase their problem to them, and get to the point where you feel really confident, like, yes, they understand that I understand and care about their stuff. And I think that you will find it pretty transformative in terms of your relationship with them, as well as how they react the next time you go to them asking for something. And I think that sort of thing is really the only way we get out of this bad, non-empathetic equilibria in companies, and it's ultimately it's up to all of us. So that's about it. Links, readings, all that stuff is at the link above, dshack.net/empathy. Should probably also note that PagerDuty is always hiring for super empathetic people. SF Toronto remote, feel free to ask me after the talk if you want, and I would love to nerd out about this stuff. I'd love to talk about it more at open spaces or anytime else during the event, so feel free to come and find me. That's it.